Welcome back. A first alert now. If you're a patient at ThedaCare, you could be getting a data breach notification letter. And Action 2 News viewers shared the letter they received.
Yeah, it comes after a data security incident at the healthcare system. A ThedaCare spokesperson says there was an incident at WellTalk in May of this year. WellTalk is a third-party vendor that sets up a patient notification platform for ThedaCare. An investigation found a software vulnerability with its MoveIt transfer server, and an unknown party exported data.
WellTalk is sending letters to potentially impacted patients and is offering access to 12 months of free credit monitoring. ThedaCare says the breach did not involve access to their system nor impact their ability to provide care to patients. It's 5